So thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm sure Ciara does as well. And just welcome to this NOMAS Projects event. My name is Cully. There's a few people that, oh, I think a lot of people will know me, but some that won't know me. I'm an artist based in Dundee and one of the directors of a charity called Morphe Arts. And NOMAS Projects works under the umbrella, or under the umbrella of Morphe Arts. So I'm one of the people behind NOMAS Projects, along with Owen. Give us a wave, Owen Daly, who is also an artist and works on the Encyclopedia of Religious. Sorry, Owen. I need to write this down because I can never remember.
Andrew's Encyclopedia of Theology.
Okay, did you get that, everyone? Big project at St Andrews University. For those that don't know, NOMAS is based in 5 office windows in Ward Road in Dundee, and we use the windows to display artwork. It's really as simple as that. There's no going into the space. You just walk past it and you stop and have a look if you want. No one's clicking you in. No one's keeping account of the numbers that look at it. Which doesn't really help for funding applications, because that's one of the things they always ask. How many people does this impact? No idea. Hundreds, thousands.
Thousands.
Exactly, yeah. There's 150,000 people Dundee population, so at least that would be, yeah. I'm sure everyone has walked past the windows at some point. But the name NOMAS, it means roaming in search of pasture. And that was something, apart from, the pretentious nature of it, that was something that Owen and I were thinking about, as humans and as artists that are constantly looking for inspiration, roaming in search of pasture. And our aim really is to, investigate the role of art in society, to engage with ideas, other people's ideas in particular, to learn from their experiences, and really to be part of a relevant conversation in the arts in Dundee and beyond. So we're delighted to be working with Ciara Menzies. Really important that you say that right, even though it's not spelt. That's not maybe the way you would say it if you saw it spelt. Ciara Menzies. I can't actually quite pinpoint a time when we connected, Ciara. I can't quite pinpoint it, but we've got to know each other over a number of years, and we've actually kind of worked together in a loose way on a project in Dundee where Ciara was a photographer working in a community project in Menzies Hill, along with Sam Rowe, who is in the meeting today as well. Just letting Chris in. So Ciara is a Scottish photographer and a visual artist. She's currently based in London, where she is at the moment. Her background is rooted in education, and she's primarily self-taught in the arts. Although recently she completed an MA in photojournalism and documentary photography at ULA, which is University Arts London. Her work follows the ups and downs of life, ranging between light-hearted stories to the more complex and deep stories that people carry. She's worked on symposiums with Edinburgh University, delving into topics like the integration of refugees within Scotland and exploring art and the sacred. And additionally, she's been involved in community art projects aimed at fostering creative expression in a deprived area of Dundee. That was the one that I mentioned earlier at Menzies Hill. Commercially, her work primarily focuses on portraiture and brand storytelling. However, her documentary work has taken a turn towards medical advocacy. Currently, she's engaged in a broader project, Period Pouch, that examines the culture of shame surrounding menstruation and the diverse subcultures that exist globally around periods. One of the significant things that I have learned about Ciara and getting to know her is that she suffers from endometriosis. I think suffer is the right word to use in this case. Her telling me was the first time, when she told me about this, it was the first time that I'd heard of the condition, and I was really shocked at the effect that it had on her life. And I was also struck by how positive a person Ciara is, despite living with this condition. And we were chatting about that just earlier as well, how she's really learnt to live it without telling people, because today, the first thing I asked was, how are you? Because, potentially she could have been having an episode today. And how she just kind of gets on with her life and is positive. So when I realised how little was known about this condition, it wasn't just me that didn't know, but actually it's a condition that's just really not well known about. We thought NOMAS could, in our small way, bring it more to public knowledge by inviting Ciara to make work about it. And so Ciara's exhibition at NOMAS is part of a wider project, Endosode, which has been made over a 3-year period. And that is a visual exploration of the unseen realities of living daily with endometriosis and the way that it shapes a person during it. And so during this talk, obviously, Ciara will provide greater insight. I'm sure it's a topic that will open up lots of questions. And as we normally do, if you have questions that you want to ask, just put them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on that. But we'll open it up for discussion once Ciara has finished. So the normal kind of time scale is Ciara's going to speak probably for about 25-30 minutes. Then we'll open it up for discussion, take any questions. And then about 5 o'clock, I'll hand over to Owen, who will let you know what's coming up with NOMAS, aiming to be finished by 5:15. So as much as we can show our appreciation, let's welcome Ciara. Thanks, Ciara. Nice silent applause for you there.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming, everyone, and making the effort on a Sunday. I'm aware that it's not a time that's convenient, and I know that there's even someone tuning in from the States, so thanks for coming along. How I thought I would work it is maybe Cully asked me to share something of my wider practice as well as the project that's exhibiting in Dundee. So I thought I'd do that by making a little PowerPoint. So first of all, I don't know where you guys, obviously it's weird because I'm presenting and feeling like I'm having a conversation, but no one's necessarily replying in moments. But when you sometimes hear artists and people talk, it can feel a bit intimidating that they seem to only get to work on their passion project. And I wanted to acknowledge that I also do work in a commercial way or commercial sense. And so I just thought I'd show just a really small snippet of some of that work that I do. Before I quite start what I prepared, is there a big bar because I've opened up to see your faces at the top of the screen? Like, sometimes, can you only see the slideshow? Okay, because sometimes it makes those weird boxes and then that'll be visually distracting. So anyway, so here we go. So I do a lot of, as I said, in visual storytelling. So it can really range from lots of different things, whether it's working for fishmongers or I work often a lot in textiles and in fashion. So that can be from the factory floor to the final product to a real range of things. So commercially, that's a lot of what I do, and it's portraiture based. I also take a lot of pictures of artists and portraits of people in different spaces. And I suppose for me, I always feel quite informed by my documentary background or the passion that I have for the documentary sphere. And so that's kind of how I work commercially. And there's some things that I will refuse to do ethically. So like I never remove anything from pictures. I won't airbrush things, anything like that. This is what it looks like. And there's maybe some minor tweaks to the colouring, but that's about it. But I just wanted to make a small kind of snippet on what that looks like in commercial photography. But we're here to talk about documentary work. So as Cully mentioned, I have a wider project called Period Pouch, which is looking at the shame culture of periods. And ultimately, my argument is that if periods are seen as shameful, then women will always be seen as less than men. And so how can we have an open conversation about something that is still private and still vulnerable, but also looking around shame? And the project's really developed from its initial space into something much more. But I'm just going to take you through a few slides on what it looks like. It's this is a poem that I was quite instrumental for me, and I'll just read it out for you. It's by Rupi Kaur. Apparently, it's ungraceful for me to mention my period in public because the actual biology of my body is too real. It's okay to sell what's between a woman's legs more than it's okay to mention its inner workings. The recreational use of this body is seen as beautiful, while its nature is seen as ugly. So the kind of wider premise of the work is a bit more intense, I think, than the imagery that you see. But how I was making it is a diptychs, so two pictures seen together. And it's called Period Pouch because it's about what a woman carries and how she carries her period products with her. And what I started to discover and develop discover and find out was that people carry such different things. And I had no idea. I think women in the room will understand this a bit more, but often you know what your friend's purse looks like, but you don't really know what she carries or where she carries it, and you could guess. But I felt like there was a lack of open conversation there. And also, I would say from most of the men in my life, it would be a really embarrassing or uncomfortable topic for them or for myself to talk about with people. So I'm like, how do we start to bring more of a discussion about it? There is an element of me that a little bit hates that I made some work on periods, because my brothers are like, here she is, the staunch feminist talking about periods again. But also, I think it's still a reality and still something that's interesting. And yeah, so each picture is taken, like I said, in the same format, and then has a little part of the interview that I have with each of the women or girls. So actually, this picture was taken in Germany. The previous one was in London. The last one was someone from Taiwan. So my aim, I have kind of places that I want to go with this project, but I'll keep moving on through because I'm aware we don't have loads of time. Another project that I want to talk to you about is called 1 in 10. And as Cully also mentioned in the introduction, I've ended up making some work around medical advocacy of the last wee while. And I was thinking a lot about chronic pain in general. So my condition obviously involves chronic pain, but so many people struggle for chronic pain, and I often have found it really hard to describe what happens to me. Frankly, actually, rarely does anyone ever ask me what the sensation I feel is. I think maybe 3 people in my life have ever asked me what the sensation is for me. And I thought really interestingly about that, like, why don't we ask people? Is it because we don't have a reference point? Is it because we don't really want to know? Is it because we've never thought about asking it? Maybe that's only a question I think about asking because it's something I experience. So the premise of this work is looking at that 2-prong. How do you express something that words maybe can't describe? And how do I, or others, the viewer, experience something that they may never have the sensation of in their body? So the participants in this project, none of them have the same condition as me. And this work was made in collaboration with them. And was made in a series of workshops. So it's quite collaborative and quite multimedia and mixed media at some points. So the first, it actually has 5 kind of elements to it. I'll just show you a few of them today. But these are portraits that I took of the participants, and then they manipulated the imagery according to the sensation they feel. So whether that's the burning that you can see, or I'm not sure how close it is on your screen, maybe I can zoom in, but there's some like holes and things. So like this woman feels almost like a tightening in her chest, which is why she's put tape there, or a scratching and a gnawing feeling. So it was really interesting making this with them and seeing what their response was, and trying to understand something that they feel and what they go through in everyday life. So in the farthest right-hand picture, there's a brown patch that's actually treacle, because she often feels like she's walking, or her arms particularly are going through treacle. So there's literal treacle on the picture. It's nothing else than dodgy. And she put, what do you call it, like can snow on her head, because she felt like she was always in a kind of snowstorm or a fog. So that was kind of interesting. Also, as part of this project, they wrote letters to pain on my website. If you want to see more in depth about this, you can see some of the other stuff that they have. It's called 1 in 10, I should have said at the start, because 1 in 10 is a medical way that they rate and understand pain. So they would say, on your pain level, what is it for 1 in 10? And I think it is the stupidest rating system I have ever heard in my life. It's so arbitrary, and someone's 10 can be someone else's too. And yeah, so it's kind of playing on that and looking at the kind of maybe the mockery of that system. These pieces are the number that they felt on the day that we had the interview, and they're layered pieces that are in acetate together. The idea being that the more you look at them, the less clear the person is, because often the more pain you're in, the less clear your world is around you. The colours are symbolic to them of what pain is represented to in their body. So I also wanted to show you some work that is still in progress. I've actually shown no one this work, so lucky you, exclusive. So again, sometimes feel like when you hear an artist talk or someone talk about work, it can be quite polished because it's all the thinking's been done. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot into some work that I've been making around convalescence and what it looks like. So this is a series of images all shot on photographic film. There are some colour versions. I took some in colour and some in black and white. The ones I'll show you today are just the black and white images. I took some time off at the beginning of the year for what I'm calling my convalescence trip. And it was a really interesting time and something that was a real struggle in many ways to stop and to focus on myself and my health. And I shot only film. I didn't take my digital camera with me at all. And I didn't process any of the film to very recently. So I wasn't keeping track on what I'd photographed. Sorry if I'm going too quick. When you look at I don't know about you guys, please let me know or put in the chat. When you're looking at your own work, I'm always like, move on. I think because you're so used to seeing it. I'll try and go a bit slower. So endosode. Endosode is a made-up word. I seem to have this as a subliminal theme in my work where I make up words like period pouch and endosode. Endosode is an endometriosis episode. So my experience of endometriosis is that I have pain all the time, and then my body goes into labour-like symptoms where I effectively go into contractions of labour 2 or 3 times a week. And I don't know when it's going to happen, and I don't know how long it's going to happen. So I have the kind of pain and the contraction, but I don't obviously give birth. And for me, I call those episodes endosodes because otherwise I don't have any other way to differentiate the continual pain and then the kind of intense high level pain. So the work that we're going to see is work that I've taken during episodes, so during endosodes of high pain throughout a 3-year period. There are many pictures that I didn't take because in the moment, often I can't even remember things. I can become nonverbal. I can become almost a bit like delirious, where I don't really know where I am, or the pain's so overwhelming that I'm throwing up or quite confused, or often just literally lying on the floor writhing in pain. For most of my own experience, I was told that I was making up my condition and that I didn't have anything wrong with me. So it took me 13 years to get a diagnosis, which means that a lot of my experience has been with medical silencing and also a lot of like thinking it's in my own head, so hiding anything that happens to me. And the work in this project is about how people perceive me, how I am now, and versus what is my experience and my everyday reality, which are often very different. And very few people ever really get to see me in an endosode. And only really in the last 3-4 years have I even started to let my family or people who live with me see anything. Often I just say I'm not feeling very well, and then I shut a door and I go into rooms and crazy things happen and I don't say anything. And I've learned to kind of wail in silence. And there's actually a series of 5 images that you'll see, which is an example of that. So I don't even know why I started taking pictures. It wasn't like I'm going to make a big project about this. I just started recording, and in fact I really hate the work. I really don't like looking at it, and I found the process probably harder than I thought I would. I think partly because I experience the pain, I don't often see it, and I found it quite hard sometimes because I remember each moment that they happened, and it's almost a bit like reliving it sometimes, or it's not, it sounds like I'm re-traumatizing myself. It's not like that. It's more, we're so good at like forgetting and moving on. And I think because for me, there isn't an end point and there's no cure to my condition, it just continues to happen. Then it's much easier to forget each episode because, you know, there'll be hundreds or thousands more coming. So, yeah, so I just thought I'd break it down. Like I said, I'd talk about the project, then I'd talk about the book, and then about NOMAS, just so you guys are clear where I'm going. My inner Joyce used to be my colleague, my teaching colleague, because she's going to be laughing, I know, at my teaching. Here's our points for what we're going to be learning today, boys and girls. Don't worry, I won't be doing a plenary at the end. So I'll just read what I've put up here, which is Endosode is the opening chapter for an ongoing project on endometriosis. It's not a cathartic exploration, but really a desire to invite a conversation that 1 in 10 women experience. And that, I suppose, is the kind of shocking thing, is that I think everyone in this group will have heard of diabetes, dyslexia, Alzheimer's. They're still the same percentage of 1 in 10. And I find it really fascinating that maybe the women in the group may have heard of endo now, especially maybe in the last 5 years, maybe a bit longer. Some men have heard about it, but most people really, if they know anything about it, they just think it's a painful period. And actually, it's not really to do with it at all. So, so the power of being seen is one that we can't take lightly, whether it's endometriosis is your story or not your story. We all carry hidden pain, and what does it look like to bring a space for that? So I'm just going to go through a series of images. There are captions to the pictures. I haven't put them on because I felt they were a bit visually distracting. And I'll explain why later. It'll come up in a bit. So I'll just kind of slowly go through a selection of the work. This is quite an extensive body of work. So this is what is currently being exhibited at NOMAS is really small. This is even also quite small. So it was hard to pick pictures that kind of help sum it up, but we'll have a nosy and see what you think. So the original kind of iteration of this work was in a book format, and I have what I've been doing with Nomas and the space there has been able to translate some of that from a book to the wall. But what's quite interesting is the things that I can do with a physical book and themes that you can build up in that space that are hard to translate. So what you can't maybe see sometimes in it being on an online, like showing you stills like that, is about using images to convey certain messages. So kind of key messages in the book, I would say, are the kind of passage of time, relentlessness. It's like just like the images like keep repeating, not as in literal repeating of images, but because there's so many and they're so similar in some ways. And also a very big element of it is hidden. And there's a special printing technique that I've used that when you see the physical book, I have photographs that sit juxtaposed in the book that are me normally. So versus what actually happens. So I was playing with the idea that I kind of mentioned earlier about how people perceive me and versus how I actually experience the world. And in the book, there's invisible images, so they're clear varnish printed on paper. So you'll see I've got a little video I'll show you about the book, and even in the video it's hard to see. It's like you almost physically have to touch it, but when you move the page as you progress through the book, you see more and more of these pictures that you realize there's actually something on the page when you didn't realize there was to start with. And photographs, as I'm sure many of you have experienced who were around in the film photography original days, would come in negatives, and then you print them and they print into the positive. So I was playing with that idea. Like a negative photograph isn't not a real photograph or not a real depiction of what happened, but it's a very particular version that's kind of warped. And so the photographs that are invisible are in the negative, and the things that are in color that are more reality and more real are some of the images that you've just seen. So the idea being that what people perceive as my reality isn't really my reality. That is my reality, and that this is a front and a facade. And it is true, like I do have the joy of and things in my life. It's not all, dew or crying, but that also is a lot of my life. And so how do I give a more realistic reality? How do I convey some of that? So that's something that's really hard to think about how to make into a physical space, especially in a digital space and a space online. And it's been some of the reason that I haven't published much of this work online yet, is I don't quite know how to communicate some of those things that I think are quite central themes, and are maybe more connectable to people of things that they have hidden in their life, whether it's stories that they carry or experience that they have. And so I'm just going to show you a few stills from the book. We can get in, I won't go into it, but I'm happy to talk about it for those people who love this kind of thing. But everything is nerdily themed, from the type and how I built it to the type of sizing of the book is symbolic to the typography inside and all of it. But yeah, so it's kind of built this way. But here's the image here that I was meaning, again, you might not be able to see, but you can maybe see that there's something there. So these images kind of sit alongside, and they are printed heavier and heavier throughout the book. So most people read the book and then go back to the start and realize that they actually already passed 5 or 6 images that they didn't notice they'd passed. So there should be a small video. I won't make us watch all of it. This is very much on the book being built and the functionality of the book over you seeing and going through the whole book in its process. But I've tried to echo in the design. These are all handmade books, kind of elements of hiddenness or not seeing through, and things not always looking as they appear. So some images you'll recognize. So there's a picture there that you can't see, but you may be able to see a little bit in person. How the book's set up as well is that I kind of made it, because it's quite an intimate subject in many ways, I kind of felt that in the book format, especially in its first way, was kind of like these are the timestamps that you saw earlier, that when you read a book, especially a photo book, only one or maybe two people can read it at a time. And it felt a bit more like a conversation that I was having with someone, especially as it's something that's been so hidden in my life. And so the way I built the book is you kind of go through the book, you may or may not know what it's about. And then at the end, I have captions for each photograph that you can go back and reread and look through. And some of them are a bit more extensive about episodes or things that have happened that are being either quite crazy, or some of them are just thoughts that I've had. They're kind of quite autobiographical, I suppose, in their nature, as well as being quite documentative and descriptive. So that's kind of how the book's set up. So I want to talk a little bit about the Numerous project and how it is in its current iteration. I'm not sure if any of you have actually been. I know two people on the screen who've been for sure. So this is a sketch that I sent Cully of my kind of idea of how to put it on the wall. And so how do I take the same themes? So I was thinking about the colour blue, you may or may not recognise, comes from one of the photographs that I included. And I really didn't want it to be like talking about a women's problem and gynecological things. There must be blood and it must be red and be about periods. I just felt it was like a bit cliche, and also like people switch off like that about it. And it's not really about periods. And I think that's the misconception, is endometriosis is linked to the female reproductive system, and women's reproductive systems often include periods, but that is not what the work's about. So I felt like I wanted to take away from that being a strong colour theme. But I was trying to think about how do I take the same concepts of the book being hidden and translate that onto the wall. So there's a piece that you have to look through, a piece of vinyl, so it's kind of hidden behind, and you have to, literally it's hidden. We have some layerings, and then I tried to emulate with material being placed on top of the image to have the same idea of the two images being juxtaposed, of the one of the normal me and the me in an endosode. I think it could be more successful than maybe how it's come out. I think the printing of the material was a little bit darker than I thought it would be. I'd like it to have been a little bit finer, but that's okay. These things are allowed. We're allowed to fine tune. And yeah, I was just thinking a lot about how to do different, how do I convey a wide project in effectively 5 little vignettes. So this is the kind of artist drawing that I've done for it. And then this is some of how it looks in the space. This is Cully's photography work, so thank you for your artistry. And there's actually 5 windows. You can't quite see the curved one. And you'll see that's the one on the left you have to kind of peer through. So yeah. I feel like I don't know what else to say, but that's where I am. So I'm sure you have questions or thoughts. You don't have to like the work, and I will not be offended by anything. So please, I'd love to have some honest discussion or feedback and discussion around what it looks like. Thank you for listening. I'm aware that it's not the cheeriest of images to always be looking at.
Thanks so much, Ciara. I'm just looking in the chat. There's no questions yet, but if people feel comfortable to do that, or if you want to just unmute, put your hand up and just chat that way, that's absolutely fine. One of the questions, Ciara, well, there's so much in it, and obviously we've chatted before, and I was saying it just at the beginning how important it is as a subject. You know, when you said, because I'd forgotten about that 1 in 10 people, the same percentage of people have diabetes, for instance, and we know about that and just how unknown this is. And it's interesting once you do hear about something. Once I'd heard about it, I remember reading Sally Rooney's book. I think I can't remember which one it was.
Just Friends.
Yeah, the one about friends. What's it called? Do you remember? I can't remember. But one of the characters is endometriosis, and I think I messaged you and I said, have you read this book? And then I'm just more aware of it becoming more publicly noticed as well, or being talked about. And I just wondered, you know, like, how could your work become, you know, because you've made that beautiful book, which I think is beautiful, and I don't know if there's copies available. If you made them by hand, I'd imagine there's not too many available for sale, because people might be interested. But I just wondered how your work could become like an advocacy for raising awareness, you know, in a much more public, because obviously one of the reasons we invited you to NOMAS is because we are interested in NOMAS and bringing stories that don't normally get told, but we are, kind of small kind of influence and so on compared to bigger. So I just wondered if that's something you've tried to do with your work.
I mean, something that I'd like to go further with it. If I'm honest, something I struggle with it is like, here's my face. And I think there's an element where I'd feel more comfortable with pictures of other people. And I don't want it to come across as some kind of self-indulgence, like, here's another artist wagging on about the pain. And but I think like the only reason I made it was, like I said at the start, it's not a cathartic exercise. I'm showing this because I want people to understand the realities. And ultimately, I think I'd love if endometriosis could have a cure. I think what's really realistic and what is much more easily doable and achievable is for the quality of life of endo sufferers to be quite different. And I think diabetes is a really helpful comparison, because the life of a diabetic person is so different. My granny just touches her arm with her phone and she can tell you her blood sugar levels. She was, they should boil needles, so that it's so different. And I think that could be changed. And I think, awareness creates funding creates research creates change. And I think I'm part of that process can look like. But also it's really hard to get women's stories heard. And that is the reality, is that people are really, women's health in particular is not a sexy subject. No one really wants to talk about it. So there's definitely been some stuff. And I think, what's her face from Radio 4? She's got a really good book about bloody time period, which is actually very funny, and I bought for all of my 3 brothers and my father for Christmas a couple of years ago. It's worth a read. Emma Barnett, she talked quite openly about it, and I think there's more of a discussion happening, which is great. But it's it's not enough. There needs to be more.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone on the call. I feel like I'd like to help and to get this out, knowing more. And I don't know if I'm the right person to do it, but there might be people here who have connections or people that could take it to it, because it feels like the body of work's there, and it's whether it is, like you say, funding that develops research, but it feels like one of these things that if it gets the kind of public attention, you've got that body of work there. So questions are coming in, Ciara. You might be able to see them as well, but just to start with a really kind of practical question from Rosie. She's asking what size the portraits are of the women in 1 to 10. The
1 to 10 pictures are A2 in size.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, A3.
Were you expecting that, Rosie? That's quite big, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there are some that are that lies A3 and A4. There's some smaller ones because I printed multiple of them for them if they wanted to try things out, and some of them decided to do multiple things in different pictures. So there's some that are larger and some that are smaller.
That's cool. Yeah, I was just wondering, because of all the different techniques people had used, I was like, what kind of size are these? But that's really nice to know that you could kind of have a conversation with it because of the size as well. So that's good.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give them space. And a few people have thought that I've done that to the pictures in response. I was like, I don't really feel comfortable burning someone's face. But it was really interesting working with them, and I wanted to give them the options to do that. So if you go to my website, I can put the link in the chat, but you'll see a bit more detail and you can maybe see them. I think I have some exhibition photos up there, so you can maybe see the size better.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, look at that. I know it's really interesting, really great, sort of poetic way of kind of getting to actually describe such a intense experience.
Yeah, and some of the other ways that I used it was making embossing plates with them, and we've done drawings, and so it's kind of a bit more multimedia, or what's the word? Not multimedia, wrong word. Media. Thank you. So maybe worth having a nosy at that too.
Definitely. Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you so much as well.
Of course.
Thanks, Rosie. There was something about collaboration and trust that I was thinking about as well, even the period pouch. So you've got a photograph of that person who has obviously, a bit like what you're doing, but you're kind of choosing to take photographs of yourself, and then obviously trying to convince someone or even the 1 to 10 series, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I just wonder how much time when you're starting a project like that is spent building up the relationships with people, so that, because they might look at the work and go, oh, I don't like that, like
yeah, I mean, you don't
so how
really
much time is spent building relationships and trust?
I mean, I think you're completely right. And a big part that I think a lot about is my role as like my role of care in my work. So how am I being a custodian of their story well, but also how am I making sure that I'm not moving in spaces that I'm not either able to provide care for them in or not qualified in. And I think having the background in education, we also work a lot with quite vulnerable families and kids, and you're very aware of what that is. But I also have that experience from that side. But I'm coming in, I'm not, an art therapist or a clinical psychologist, and so there is some things that I won't talk about or areas that I won't go into with them because I don't want to open up something that I can't take forward. And one of the questions in that project in particular I asked was around what support do they have, where are they in their spaces, and yeah, I mean, there is a point where you're going to make work and maybe they won't like it, and how do you? So like one person, I had 2 people in the project who pulled out 3/4 of the way through, so I have half a body of work with them, and I can't control that, but that can also be really hard and disappointing. But that's working with people, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I could just draw instead.
Yeah, there's obviously something relational about the way you work as well. Even going back to say when you've worked with different communities, and I get the sense that that's part of your work process is the relationship building. There's a question here from Carol. She says, "Can you say something about the image of the cut hair?"
Yes. So we got really sick and I ended up blacking out of a wheel at a car, and I was in a road traffic accident, and it was 2 weeks before lockdown, and it was just all wild, and I basically was very, very sick, and I was probably deluding myself and other people on how much I was coping, and it probably being quite bad for maybe about a year, and that was almost like quite a bad pinnacle. And I was getting to the point that I had such chronic fatigue that I just couldn't wash myself properly anymore, and my hair is curly and it's a massive tat, and you can't brush this thing easily. And I ended up being locked down by myself, so for 14 weeks, and I had no flatmate, was stuck abroad, and I couldn't leave my house. It was all kind of wild, and I just couldn't wash myself, and I just thought I have to cut my hair off. And so I just put my hair in 2 bunches and I cut it off, and I found that really difficult to do. And ironically, I just had my hair cut, this is the shortest I've had my hair since then. And hair has been a really interesting thing for me in the process, because the more sick I've become, the less curly my hair has become. And also I've had quite dramatic hair loss, where women often can't remember what it's called now. Some women, once they've given birth, it's been such a stressful experience on their body that they have this hair loss. And I've had quite a lot of rounds of that, where maybe every 18 months I have this really dramatic hair loss. And I know for lots of people, they think I have lots of hair, but for me, it's like I can never see my scalp before. And so it's been quite a difficult thing, having to adjust to what my body will and won't do. And the cutting of the hair, I still find that hard. And I like the memory, if I dwell on that, was really difficult for me to do. And I think with so many other things that was going on. And it was embarrassment as well. I just felt so embarrassed. I was like, at that point, I was like 28, 29. And I was like, gosh, I can't even wash myself. Like this is really embarrassing. And what's wrong with me? And why can't I cope?
Yeah. Thanks for answering that question, Ciara. Thanks for asking it, Carol, as well, because that's just the insight into that. Just another really significant thing for us to know. And this might take us into Fiona's question. Fiona said, "Thanks for sharing so openly about something that's so personal to you. As your friend, I was interested in my response. It's hard to look at something that invites me into your pain. How do you steer away from a sympathetic response?" I don't know if other people were thinking that, and I know you've alluded to that as well. The idea of, I don't know, the book Poverty Safari, and it's sharing something that that does that. So just wondered if you can answer.
Yeah, I suppose on one level, I feel like the work's so new that I have only certain spaces people have seen it. I mean, the hard thing is when I first exhibited it I did some of this for my master's. It's really hard for me to hide to watch people's reactions because it's me. You can't really be like, oh, do they like it? They don't know who the artist is. It's quite obvious. Slash slightly insulting when someone's like, oh, I recognize you from your work, and you're like, oh, awkward. But yeah, I suppose, can you ever do that? I don't know, but I think I don't know if I can ever take that away. I suppose I can't change what someone else is saying or feeling, but I also haven't really felt that people have been overly. I think for people who know me, it's sometimes really hard for them to look at. And I know, for example, like my dad came to my exhibition and looked at a couple of pages of the picture of the book and then was like, oh, look at More Than a Home at Christmas. I'm like, well, why did you come all the way to London to see it? And no, it's because he's a repressed Scottish male. So I understand that that's hard. But I think also for me, I often feel like most of my friends don't really understand what happens to me a lot of the time. And I kind of, maybe in a perverse way, I'm like, I want you to be able to, I want you to know that that's what's happening when I say I've had a bad day. And I suppose you can't shoehorn someone into that, but I don't know. Yeah. It's a really hard.
I suppose I was kind of interested in the duty of care thing. So you talked about duty of care for the other people, and I suppose I don't know if I'm expressing this right here, but it kind of feels like I don't want you to have to feel you've got a duty of care to take care of my response, or
yeah,
you know what I mean by that?
No, I totally understand what you mean.
Yourself in that, so that it doesn't alter the dynamic of how the personal relationship is.
No, I think you're completely right, Fiona, and I don't actually feel that, and I think maybe through the process of making it at the time, I feel like I probably went through it again, but I also feel a little bit detached from it, though I said obviously earlier that I don't like looking at them and they're sometimes hard to look at, but I can also look at them in a clinical way. I think it's when you choose to engage in the emotion side of it, but I also don't feel like it's a traumatizing experience for me to put them up and that I'm putting myself through an uncaring thing to do it. But I do think that's a really important question, and I think it's really easy for me to care for other people and not care about myself. And so I can understand that's a good question.
Thanks, Ciara. Question here from Laura. And also just Laura saying she has endo too, and it was really heartening to see it being visualised in Dundee city centre. In my own work, I struggle with depicting my condition as it's all about pain and strife versus showing the holistic view of who I am in my entirety. Wondering if this is something you ever feel you have to consider.
Yeah, as in like, because you're only seeing one part of who I am. I think, I mean, I suppose that's the kind of the thing about the two images that's juxtaposed. And there's a point of view like, what if this is the only picture someone ever sees of me and it's like me with snot on my face, like, cool. But I think the wider story of endo is so much more important. And I also think that there's other parts of who I am that come out in either the way I make work or other work that I make. And even if it's not directly autobiographical, I think we are who we are. And if we're really working out of our authentic self, then our practice communicates that in different ways. I think I don't think any project can also be all the things. And so what is this project? And I suppose the main message is like, what am I trying to convey? What are we trying to do with this work? And then what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for that question. A lot of these are great questions. They're all kind of interlinked as well. And I'm looking and thinking, well, I jumped to the last question, but I think I'll just take them in order. And I think that you'll see how they all connect. Laura had just said Owen solidarity to all fellow endo folks. And we're going to come to Owen's question, which will maybe open up that discussion a bit more. This is a question from Claire. I know your work is largely visual, but I wonder if there's scope to talk about this on Women's Hour. And that's, I think, what I was alluding to as well, is how do you get this out there? Because we've worked with Kieran Dawes before, a photographer. I think you know Kieran as well, Ciara. And he did his Gingers project, which was on, I think once it gets picked up on something on the radio or TV, then other people start to follow it. And, I don't know how he got in on that, but it obviously was a popular story. And then it just started to get around. So I don't know, how do you get on Women's Hour? But
I mean, if anyone knows anyone Women's Hour, I'm really happy to go in and talk with them. So not a problem.
yeah.
I think that's the really hard thing. And it's like, how do you get your work seen? Because sometimes I'm like, is it just my work's not good enough? Whether it's this or other work, or I think sometimes as artists, it's so hard. And I think because this world's so, nepotistic, the word I'm trying to say, full of nepotism, then, and it's all about who you know, not what you know. And that's part of the reason I'm in London, because, if you need a human or an animal birthed, I know gamekeepers and district nurses coming out my ears, but I don't know people in media. And I think that's the space on like, how do we get work done? And so I think we sometimes feel like it has to be people at the top or not anyone at the top, but I think we underestimate the power that we have as a small individual. So whether it's sharing someone's work on Facebook or talking about it to someone else, like I think that has quite a lot of power and can also be in that space. So I don't know what the answer is. If I had the answer, I suppose I'd already be in Women's Hour. But I think it is a topic and a place that needs to be in other spaces. And yeah.
So once again, if anyone else has got that skill set in this chat or knows someone that does and believes in what Ciara's doing, that's, I would love to be able to do that, but it's needs to be the right person with the right connections.
Yeah.
The other thing is, obviously, you studied your master's just recently at UAL, and I just wondered, this a wee bit of a tangent, but you think doing a master's, being at that kind of level or in that conversation, that would help to propel things like that. And I just wondered if on that course, if there's, often when you do an arts course, it doesn't really prepare you for a career in arts or life after you've studied.
Yeah.
It's great for focusing on projects and so on, but you come out and go, no one's actually helped me how to get ahead. So did that help in being in London?
I think it gave me some connections in like meeting people that I would never have met before, and because I'm self-taught, there's things in the industry that I didn't really know how it worked. I just did it how I did it because that's the only reason I know how to do it. And I think the great thing about teaching is if you want to get to a head teacher, there's a really clear way of how to get up there. It's like a really clear progression path, and you can go different ways, but it's quite clear. If you want to make it as an artist, the great thing is anyone can do it from any way, but also there's no really clear way to advance, and there's no clear way to be like, this is what this looks like, or this is what success looks like, or this is what it is for this and this. So it's quite hard to know. And I don't think my master's was wasted, and I think it was really helpful. And would I have made this work like this? Probably not. And so I think that's given me an opportunity in the space. I'm also only 6 months out, so I don't know. Well, just over, maybe it's about 9 months now, but so I don't know if more things will come. And I think that's part of the thing with the art world, is often the pace is slow. And then once you get that bit of umption, bit of something, it can propel and go faster. But I don't know.
I think now you've got this body of work, and it feels to me that, just a bit of research and finding where you could go. And it's like you've got the work done, and it's just a matter of finding places to.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you need like a PhD to apply for grants and applications. That's what I found. I'm like, if I could write, then I'd be a writer, but I'm not.
Yeah.
So like I've applied. I actually just this week applied for an exhibition space in London that had an open call for artists making work on self-representation, and I was like, tick. But it took me 3 full working days to prepare the application, and so sometimes you're like, is that worth it for £600?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
It's interesting just you giving that insight, because I think any artist in the group would understand that and experience similar. Sam's just put a reference in for someone that might have a similar piece artist as well, and I think things like that, where you could connect to someone else and have that conversation within that world allowed. So you might want to have a look at that. Looks like it's an event that's coming. But not at the moment, Ciara, because you've got to answer questions at the moment. There's one here from Eileen, and then I think I'll hand over to Owen with Owen's question, which is the last question, and we're just on 5 o'clock now. But this question from Eileen, thank you. Have you found since sharing your work on Endosode that people have understood you better? I know that you found this difficult and not necessarily a healing experience, but do you feel in people's better understanding of how you experienced life has impacted positively your experience of living with endometriosis?
I think it's given, I mean, no one, you can never live a life in someone else's shoes, can you? And I think Scottish people particularly are quite good at downplaying everything and being stoic. And I think sometimes I've had some really open chats with friends about it, and I don't think people aren't listening, but also it's quite different when you see it. And I do think that, I suppose, really, to answer that question, you're the one to answer that question. You know, like the people in the group who know me, you're the ones who can answer it, because I don't know, I'm not you. But I think there is an element where, you know, I think of one particularly, like a male friend who was like, oh, I didn't really realize it was that bad. Or the realities of what that looks like. And so that was, and for me, that's a win, because, you know, any relationship is about communication. And if we can communicate in a way that someone else can understand something better, then I think that's a win, because there's things in other people's lives that I don't understand really, and maybe don't ask the right questions about, because I don't have the context to ask the question. So if we can try and communicate in another form, and ultimately art is just communicating, isn't it? It's a way of communicating something to someone else. They may not interpret it the way you want to, and that's also the hard thing. I can't control how people perceive the images, and that can be a hard thing when they're so vulnerable and personal to you. But I think also most art, or maybe every piece of art, everything that we create comes from a place of vulnerability, which is why we're so about it.
Yeah. That's a great answer, Ciara, and great questions, everyone, as well. I'll just ask you your question, Owen, while you set up. And yeah, so Owen said pain is intensely isolating. What support is there for endo sufferers? And I think you maybe alluded to that. There is not a lot, but what is there? What is out there?
So, I mean, Endometriosis UK is the main support space. So it kind of does two-prong. It does one, it does kind of like research and collating research, and then secondary, it has kind of like support groups. And I think they're really important spaces for people to be in. The first time I met someone else with endometriosis, I actually went to a government discussion on women's health, and they had a 5-minute slot on endo, and I met someone else there who had endometriosis, and I actually cried. Like, I was quite overwhelmed by meeting someone else who had the same thing, because I'd suffered so long by myself with it. So I think that it's always going to be a lonely journey, because no one else experiences exactly what you experience. But I think having some other people, but also asking people about it, like even Cully, when we first had the conversation, like, how are you feeling today? You know, like, that was a really lovely thing that often people don't maybe think to ask, or you know, they might ask, how's it been for the last wee while, or I don't know. But also, you don't, you know, like, let's talk about my endometriosis all the time. And so it's a hard one to play, but I suppose it's the same thing as anyone else. It's just, how do we acknowledge it? Because I think when we don't talk about it, the loneliness with it becomes increased. But there's support out there from Endo UK, and I think there's others independent groups as well, but not much really.
That's what we need to change, isn't it?
Yeah.
Get you on Women's Hour. and other better shows, maybe.
Yeah. We won't tell Women's Hour that you think there's other better shows out there, but sure.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't watched it, so that was a terrible remark for me. I'll edit that.
Women's Hour is a radio program.
I think edit that out of the recording. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, actually, yeah. Sorry.
You will. It's been on since 60s.
I'm thinking of something else. I know a painter actually listens to Women's Hour, and he recommends it. Yeah. So anyway, over to you before I put my foot in.
Cully, I love that. That was like, some of my best friends are female.
Yes.
Listen to Women's Hour once or twice. Thank you so much, and it's nice to meet you. I know I've been a shadowy figure, just in the background of emails, but what a privilege to listen to something so intensely personal. And I just, from somebody who's had kind of different episodes of chronic pain in my life, it's just that sense of isolation and how overwhelming it can be sometimes when somebody kind of brings these things to the fore and brings it out. And for both Cully and I, as he said already, it means a lot to actually be able to broach this subject the way you did, and so sensitively, in the galleries in Dundee. So we've got photos. I mean, you kind of flick past them, but some people might not have seen them. But I wanted to just show it in the installation view And you didn't even mention that the blue that's used, I believe, is a clinically significant blue, even though it wasn't the kind of cliched red, but it was NHS blue.
Yeah.
I believe used as well. And it's hard to show in the photos because of the strong contrasting light. There was sunshine on this day, such a rare thing in Dundee. But the middle window photo especially struck me, and the ones in the corner, which we've got pictures here to show people. So to handle it something so personal, so vividly, was done really well. And that sounds patronising, I don't mean it that way. It was just proud to be associated with it. You can see a little bit more here the negative, the large scale negative, or on fabric essentially, in the central picture. And then the little peephole we can kind of begin to picture. You get to see that it's not obvious in the street when you're walking past. You have to take your time and enter into the kind of experience of the show, which doesn't always come across on Zoom, as you can tell. And then this one here really meant a lot to me. And I've been reading a book by a doctor who was a chronic pain specialist. He's passed away now, but he brought his treatment through Freud, actually. And then he was referring to Jung. And so I was looking up Jung after reading this book by the kind of American doctor. He said the foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. And so, and Jung was saying more than what Freud had said. There's no coming to consciousness without pain. And people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. We go into diversions, we go into ways of hiding from the pain. And this is quite kind of ambiguous, but one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And when I looked at that picture of the shadow or the negative print over it was like the darkness literally in that way of printing, where the negative is becoming conscious, it's becoming visible. And of course you're seeing these two sort of sides of you in the work. And then we get mentally ill through not really addressing what's really there. When you're going into your room and locking the door and coming out a couple of days later, if we hide away from it. And anyway, it was something of my own interest that I was reading up on, but your work really spoke to me. It just happened to coincide with the book I was reading. So thank you for these images. And these ones as well, it's very hard. They're small photos. But they're so, in the way you showed them as well during the talk, to walk past that, it's very gripping. And I used this, I kept on the same quotes that we had from our previous artist, Ciara, and because she was referring to kind of making these things visible as well. And the vulnerability in the work is the birthplace of love and belonging and joy and courage and empathy and creativity. And authenticity, and to do what you've done without having the sympathy. As one of the other people, a sympathetic reading of the work was inevitable, but you've managed to balance all that so strongly, I think. It states it without, I don't know how to express it, but yeah, just walking past, it draws the people in, and I think it should be made much more visible. I really hope you will get in touch with the BBC, for example, and hopefully there's something transformative, which Ciara was talking about in the previous show. So we're very grateful for you to take that risk with NOMAS and to do that with us.
Thanks, Rowan. I actually wrote my thesis on the visual history of women in pain, and looking at women in pain throughout our history and representation of what that looks like. So I can share with you some of my readings that might be of interest to your current subject.
It would definitely be of interest. And I've got a friend who has PMDD, and she ended up getting surgery, but she was like yourself. I think she's late 40s now, but that's been since her 20s. And the isolation and the kind of insanity that came from not being listened to.
Yeah.
And then actually meeting a surgeon in London who was willing to do that. And it's such a dramatic step to actually deal with the chronic pain and chaos that it caused on a monthly basis.
Completely. And I think it really affects someone's identity. You know, my symptoms started when I was 13 years old. I'm 32 now, so I've nearly had it for 20 years, which basically means I've known so much more of my life in pain than without pain. And really any form of kind of added cognitive or conscience, you know, has been involved with that and informed by that. And it's a really interesting thing, like the lack of being listened to. And it's a problem in general. It's a big issue within health, and women especially in health, you know. And if a man and a woman both go into the A&E with gallstones, a man will be given pain medication 4 times quicker than a woman because his pain is believed. And I find that really, some of the fun boy racers, really interesting. Like it's not just a male female divide, but it's just around, you know, voice and agency. And it's really, and they kind of, especially if people look fine, you know, that's the hard thing.
And it's profoundly kind of, it makes you sort of, I don't know, it's a dissonance that it introduces into ordinary experience of life. It's just walking when you're kind of encountering that first time. Yeah, so, I mean, that's Simone Weil quote. I mean, that should be cultural, you know, national as well as internal. I'll stop sharing and thank you for everybody. I just want to ask you to unmute your mics and a big round of applause for Ciara.
Thank you, Owen. Appreciate that, Owen. I always enjoy Owen's introductions. Introductions, all the thought you put into it as well, you know, and the reading and the philosophy that goes behind it. But yeah, so Ciara, thank you so much. I feel quite emotional at just how you've just opened up this subject to us with such a kind of, like, you know, you're not angry. And you know, I think sometimes when people really care passionately about something as you do, it can come across like you really need everyone to pay attention to this. And I think you're doing that in just such a gracious way. And I think that's what makes the art good too. You know, because it's not polemic in the way that it's trying to manipulate people. It's telling your story, and that really comes across. And I think it comes across in your other work when you're working with other people too. So yeah, really appreciate that, Ciara. So thank you. The show's on until the 12th of this month, October. And if you get a chance to come to Dundee to see it. But thanks for coming. And once again, let's just thank
you so much. I really appreciate everyone giving their time. And I'll see you on Women's Hour, Cully, for that recording. I'll invite you to the studio for the recording.